Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon with many of the turf friends we've met over the past 35 years.
Hi, everybody. This is Joel Simmons for another EarthWorks podcast. Today, I'm going to do this by myself. Actually, I'm not going to completely do it by myself. I am going to bring in some clips of our lead agronomist, our oldest agronomist. Actually, he's not our oldest agronomist, but he's been with us the longest, Mr. Jack Higgins. And Jack has recently done a meeting for one of our distributor partners, and I'm going to have him do a lot of the talking today. But what we want to talk about is one of the biggest brands here at EarthWorks, and that brand is the Soil First Academy. And what this is, it's a 2 or 3 hour GCSAA accredited program where we basically talk about how a soil really works. And the genesis of the Soil First Academy was me taking my notes from the years that I spent teaching the soils classes at Rutgers University. I was the second year soils instructor at the 2-year turf management program at Rutgers for about 10 years. And when that ended for me, I took it out on the road, and we call that the Soil First Academy. And it has had many gyrations over the year. It has certainly been adapted over the years. And we probably have had thousands of golf course superintendents and sports turf managers, lawn care operators, students, all sorts of folks come and see us and listen to what we had to say and share their stories at the Soil First Academy. Or often it's called the EarthWorks Academy. In fact, we did a whole bunch of them again this year, and I'm traveling next week to do yet another one, and we'll do more this spring. So if you have never had an opportunity to join us at the EarthWorks or the Soil First Academy, talk to your EarthWorks distributor partner and ask them to bring the academy to your town or to your golf course even, and we'd be happy to put this on. And I can promise you, people that come to see this will come many, many times because there's so much that we go through. And what we really talk about, and this is really where I want to take this, is we talk about the concepts of biological soil management. There are a lot of concepts, agronomic concepts, that are being thrown around in our industry and have been for the almost 40 years that I've been in this business. But since the day that we started EarthWorks back in 1988, we have been very focused on the concept of biological soil management. In fact, in the academy, there is a slide of me and my founding partner, Jerry Brunetti, and standing in front of our very first trade show booth back in, I think, 1990 or maybe 89. And right behind Jerry, over his head, is a little sign that says biological soil management. So we coined that phrase, or I really should say Jerry coined that phrase back in the late 80s. And what biological soil management it is basically setting your soil profile up for the best possible proliferation of microbiology. And since we started this business back in 1988, the concepts of carbon-based fertility and biological soil management were nothing. In fact, we were called every name in the book, and so many names that I can't share in public and in polite company. But it was completely poo-pooed. And now I think I can say comfortably and happily that there are probably very few, if any, turf managers in our industry that do not have something in their shop that is carbon-based. It might be something as simple as a product with some humic acids in it, or some products with molasses in it, or something with a manure base in it, or even a sludge, which is carbon-based, not a very good carbon, unfortunately, but a carbon. But there are very few shops anymore that don't have some level of carbon-based fertility in their shop. And this is the foundation of biological soil management. When we built this company and built carbon-based, or what a lot of folks will call organic fertilizers, We never built these to be organic. We never built these to be even environmental, even though they happen to be environmental. We built them to feed microbiology. One of our biggest like chuckles, I guess, if we can call it, is listening to some of the academics that say, "Well, we used some carbon-based fertility and we tested the plant for more carbon and we didn't find any more carbon." It's not about putting carbon in the plant. In fact, the plant is carbon. What it's about is providing a food source for microbiology. Now, we started this process very early on in the early 90s, and we built a number of products. Actually, our Replenish 545 was one of the very first products we built, and it's still to this day our strongest product. I mean, I would put that up against any fertilizer of any level in the marketplace because there is a little bit of synthetic in it. There's lots of minerals in it, but there's an awful lot of good, rich carbon in that product. And it's designed to feed microbiology in the soil. And I tell this story at all of the academies, but one of the very first experiences that I had using this product was with my dear friend Tom Briner, who has been here on the podcast. He was the superintendent at Fiddler's Elbow Country Club in New Jersey, and he gave us a fairway. And this was in the middle of a hot, gooey, sticky, miserable July month in the state of New Jersey, which can be very ugly and humid and miserable. And he put it out on one fairway, and he called me, and he said, "You've got to come out here." And I was young, and I was green, and I was scared, and I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't even really truly understand the concepts of biological soil management. And so I drove the 20 minutes from my office to his property thinking that I was going to be out of business, that there was problems, that there was death and destruction or fire and God knows what. And he gets me in a cart and he drives me out here and he points to this fairway that he applied the 545. He says, "Look at this." And of course, I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. I was green and I wasn't a golf course superintendent. And he was solely the person who taught me the concepts of managing a golf course. And we looked at this property, and it was the only grass in the area that was standing tall, and it wasn't purpled, and it wasn't wilted, and it looked really good. Everything around it was really off. And so we were pretty excited about what we were seeing, and we were both discovering this together. And we realized very quickly, in fact, the story continues, that I took the same product to the next door neighbor, another golf course that was almost, butting up against Fiddler's Elbow. And we did the same thing. And I called him, a couple of days later, very excited and very proud, expecting to see this great result. And he said to me, he goes, "Yeah, I didn't see anything." And now I'm really panicked again. I went back, talked to Jerry, and I said, "Hey, what the hell's going on here?" And one of the first things that Jerry said to me was, "Do you have a soil test from the other golf course?" And of course I didn't. I was that green at the time that we weren't even looking at soil tests. But it was at that point that we realized that if we were going to make a change, and what biological soil management is really all about is creating the environment to allow for the proliferation of microbiology. We weren't necessarily providing microbiology. We were simply creating an environment by which microbiology can proliferate and the natural population of bacteria and fungi in that soil could really take off and run. And that's what biological soil management has always been. So the story goes, we went back and we tested both properties with a basic soil test. And we weren't very sophisticated at that point either on soil testing, but we looked at some basic issues. And the soil test at Fiddler's Elbow was significantly better. It had a better calcium magnesium ratio. It had a little bit more stuff. The other soil was very tight, compacted. Calcium magnesium ratio was very off. So there was some explanations as to why this particular 545 carbon-based fertilizer wasn't working as well as we thought it would. So again, the concepts of biological soil management, I will put up against anything. And I have been criticized for my 40 years. I'm continually criticized by some of the dinosaurs that think that these tools don't work. I can say with great confidence, after 40 years of experience and working with literally thousands of golf courses, sports complexes, lawn care facilities, lawn care environments, that if we can get the soil chemistry balanced, in particularly if we can get the soil opened up physically by getting, calcium, magnesium, potassium levels right, we start to open up the soil, air and water moves through it better. We start feeding. All Earthworks has been about feeding the microbiology. So we use a lot of minerals, we use a lot of carbon, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But we use the materials that jumpstart microbiology. And that's really what it's all about is creating an environment where microbiology can really do its job and proliferate these populations. And there's thousands, if not millions of them. And as Lawrence Mayhew has said here on the podcast a number of times, we know so little about what the microbiology population looks like. I've been told it's 5, 7, 8%. Lawrence insists it's less than 2% of the acknowledged biological populations in the soil. So we know very little about what's really going on. But what biological soil management teaches us is that if we create the environment by getting soil chemistry right and opening up the soil physically so air and water can move through, creating that environment by which any life form will survive and proliferate, and in this case, we're trying to get microbiology to do its job, we will create a much healthier environment and we will release more nutrients. We will create a better environment for water holding capacity, checks and balances for pathogens, deeper environments for rooting, all of the things that every turf manager knows will be beneficial to the long-term success of their property is accomplished with biological soil management. We have, again, recently seen lots and lots of agronomic concepts come through. One of the more popular ones is the MLSN program, which is minimum levels of sufficiency nutrients, which was a project done where they tested a handful of sites and evaluated the grass based on what the nutrients were. And quite honestly, we're huge subscribers of using less. And I think less is more in this case, but you have to have the right less. You have to have the soil as part of the equation. By simply going in and saying, okay, we've been using 5 pounds of nitrogen over the last number of years. Now we're going to use 2 pounds of nitrogen and make no other changes to this situation. It's not going to be successful. And we've seen this with so many clients that have gone down this road, try to cut their fuel tanks in half and assume that they're going to be able to run their equipment as long as they have. And it just simply doesn't work. But you can get to that point of reducing inputs if you let Mother Nature be a part of this program. And part of this program is basically getting the soil balanced and then feeding the soil. So our main adage has always been balance the chemistry and feed the soil. Balancing the chemistry is soil testing. Feeding the soil is what EarthWorks put together as a product line, which is carbon-based and mineral-based materials that feed the soil. There are some synthetic fertilizers in there because in any environment like ours, there are times when we need to push. So we completely understand that. Again, we're not trying to suggest that we're going to be organic, but what we are suggesting is that if we get the soil right and we start feeding microbiology and allowing that microbiology to truly proliferate, we're going to have better results. And we have seen that and proven that over the last 40 years. Our clients will tell you that. All of the folks that come here on the EarthWorks podcasts are EarthWorks believers for the most part. Some of them have been with us longer than others, but we have interviewed so many folks over the last 5 years here at the EarthWorks podcast that will have told their stories of how this process of biological soil management has worked for them. And if you haven't listened to a lot of the superintendents and the turf managers that have come and talked to us here at the podcast, please do, because you'll hear their stories, not just my story, but you'll hear their stories of how this has really worked for them. And it has worked. And again, reducing inputs is significant and has helped so many people. But you're not going to reduce inputs if you don't have microbiology on your side, because it's the microbiology that is releasing nutrients. And in fact, microbiology produces free nitrogen. A lot of their exudates are simply ammonia, which will feed some nitrogen to your plants and keep everything going and keep it on a very steady and equal scale. So everything will be being released on a regular basis. So in the academy, one of the most important slides that we talk about is the one of the three-legged stool. And this is where chemistry and physics and biology work together as one of the legs of a three-legged stool. And we talk about it in terms of a balance between those three. Chemistry affects physics, which affects biology. And what I mean by that is that if we have a chemistry that is completely out of balance, the soil physically will not work well. It will compact, it will constrict air and water movement. And without air and water, we can't have an environment for biology, biological soil management. So what we have always done is try to really focus on soil testing concepts and soil testing data so that we know that the soil physically will open up. We know if we have a soil, and we know this because we've done it tens of thousands of times over the years. And as many people that want to criticize this, feel free. But if you do the work and you go out in the field and you work with the grass growers and the superintendents and the turf managers who have done this on a regular basis, they will tell you that. They come here to the EarthWorks podcast and tell us their stories of how they changed their soils physically, in many cases by simply applying the appropriate amount of limestone, getting calcium and magnesium right. Calcium will help to flocculate a soil. If the calcium levels are low and you apply high calcium lime, you start to flocculate and move soil particles apart, and that allows for air and water to move through. That's some of the basic concepts of what biological soil management is. Yes, we do use a base saturation tool because it gives us a direction. And yes, that tool only works on high CEC soils, soils that have a lot of mineral in them. They don't work the same on low CEC or sand soils. And many of our soils that we deal with in the golf course industry are just that. They are sand-based. So we see a lot of sandy soils that have a lot of imbalances, but we manage those differently. Obviously, the difference is significant to the colloidal makeup of that soil. But when we see a soil that has maybe a 40% calcium base saturation, we know that soil is going to be compacted and tight for most soils that we deal with. So in those soils, by applying a limestone, and typically what you will see is high magnesium in those areas. Certainly the areas where we started here in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, and in the mid-Atlantic. These soils tend to be high magnesium, low calcium. By bringing in a high calcium lime, which is low magnesium lime, we actually exchange some of the magnesium off or push it away. We open up the soil physically, air and water moves through. We start feeding it with a little carbon-based fertility. That's the foundation of biological soil management. And that's what we have been doing successfully for almost 40 years now. And we have helped many, many, many turf managers get to that point. And again, I will ask you to come back to the archives here at the EarthWorks podcast and listen to their stories, because they will tell you that. They have lived it every single day on their properties. And the stories that we tell are, over and over again are just wonderful, where, we couldn't get an aerifier through a soil and we started changing the chemistry and feeding the soil a little bit, and things changed. We went from 10 pounds of nitrogen down to 2. We went from a situation where you couldn't run an aerifier over without breaking all the tines to a situation where you could run an aerifier and it runs almost like it's going through butter. We go from a situation where water would sit on a fairway for days after a rainstorm to where that water would go through that soil pretty effectively after some practice of calcium and magnesium and soil balancing. And yes, I do know that I'm going to get a lot of criticism from this from my dear friends on the internet, but I can say comfortably that I've been doing this for 40 years with great success, and I have to prove myself every single day. If I go talk to a golf course superintendent and I say, do this, and do this, and they try to do it and it doesn't work, I don't come back again. I've been doing the same thing for 40 years because it has been successful. And again, the EarthWorks podcast guests will share their stories with you. So come back and listen to this. But that's basically what biological soil management is all about. It's about creating the environment through managing chemistry and affecting physics, and bringing that environment to the table and then feeding that microbial populations with carbon-based materials. And so at EarthWorks, we built two lines. We built a line that's granular and provides volume and has these raw minerals and all that good stuff. And again, the manure that we're using is coming from egg layer. It's been digested twice. It goes through a bird. That's a biological digestion. They feed this bird with an awful lot of minerals like calcium and all sorts of things that build the strength of the shells, of the eggshells, and also to keep the birds healthy because they need to keep that bird going and producing eggs for a long time. So they put a lot of money and energy into the feed. Much of that feed is mineral, but most of that material just goes washing out through the back end. So what happens is that all of that material that they use to get the birds healthy and build strong shells, much of it is now in the manure, which we're very happy about. So there's our first biological digestion. That manure obviously is not fertilizer at that point, but it's taken into a compost facility and it's composted for the better part of a year. There's a second biological digestion there. Now what we have done is we've created a raw material that is ready for that tiny little microbe. And I like to talk about this in the academy as the 20-minute bacteria, because that's about how long they'll live in the soil. So we need to constantly provide them quick energy sources. These composted materials have been digested so that little microbe that's going to last in that soil for 20 minutes is going to be able to take this material and run with it. We also build a very strong, very complex liquid product line that has multiple forms of carbon and mineral in it. So again, we can take that 20-minute bacteria and we can give it a quick shot of energy. These are not just NPK products like most liquids in the marketplace. These materials at EarthWorks have maybe 30 or 40 raw materials, molasses and kelp meal and fish meal and seawater extracts and all sorts of there's over 25 amino acids, 70 minerals in these liquids. There's fermentation solids. There's 4 or 5 different forms of sugars, extremely complex pyramidal shaped carbon material that has short chains, the pinnacle of that pyramid, short chain carbons, medium chain carbons, long chain carbons, all designed to keep microbial and fungal populations growing actively in your soil. And when that happens, thatch is reduced quickly, mobility of nutrients is increased quickly, checks and balances for pathogen is increased, and so you have this much stronger ability, an immune system, if you will, for the pathogens to be kept in check, and you also have the ability to build humus, which holds moisture in the soil and keeps moisture management even. And that's what it's really all about. That's what microbiology does for us in the soil. And that's what this agronomic concept of biological soil management is all about. And that's why you see every single fertilizer manufacturer today. And this isn't something that happened when we started in 40 years ago, but I do believe we started a trend that allowed people to discover what carbon-based fertility is all about and what biological soil management is all about. So what it's all about, again, create the environment for the soil to allow microbiology to proliferate. It's not about just simply reducing inputs. It's not about pH. It's not about all these things. All of these things are a part of it. But the way a soil really works is through microbiology. And that's what our industry has discovered. And I am very proud to have been a very big part of that concept, of that process over the last 40 years. And as I start to look toward retirement, I'm going to be able to back off and say, yes, we made a significant impact in an industry. And we helped people discover the value of biological soil management, microbiology. We've made their lives easier. We've allowed them to get home at 2 o'clock. They're not pulling hoses in the middle of the day, because when you have good biology, you have moisture management, you have stuff that goes and works for you. You're never going to walk into the shop and see everything gone the next morning because you're not on that razor's edge. That's what some of these other agronomic programs will do for you. If you're cutting your fertility, or it's the old adage that if you're going to try to fly a plane across the country with only half a tank of gas, you're not going to make it. It's a simple concept, but fertility is what keeps everything going, and mostly keeping biology going. So that's what it's all about. Again, the EarthWorks Academy is a project that we've all been very proud of here. I would like to show some of the work that Jack Higgins has done. Now, he recently recorded one of his talks that talked about biological soil management, and I'm going to share with you some of the clips from here. And this is a section of one of his academies that he was sharing with some clients down in I think he was in the Carolinas. I'm actually not even sure where it was, Virginia or the Carolinas. But Jack has gotten very good at talking the talk of biological soil management. So let me pass the baton to Jack Higgins right now. I'm going to come back and kind of finish up after this little piece of Jack's and talk about things like nitrification and the importance of that. Because as we talk in the academy, probably the two most important things we talk about is the three-legged stool concept that I've just broached on, and then nitrification. So listen to Jack and take a listen to what he has to say about the whole biological soil management. This is Jack essentially doing a piece of the EarthWorks Academy.
Everything starts with the soil. That's what we do. That's the way we approach greenkeeping. We consider the substrate, consider where most of that plant is living and doing its interaction. There's a lot of activity and go-between in that root zone, and we focus on that. Even when we're coming over the top, because EarthWorks has a lot of liquids and a lot of, and of course we're coming over the top with our granular fertilizer as well, but we're thinking about how it's affecting that root zone. So just like the iceberg, there's so much happening underneath. And when you take this approach, what you do is make the job easier. You save inputs. You make it more, that is how it's more environmental as well. You're reducing inputs in being water, pesticide, fertilizer, and, fuel, labor, and your stress, just the act of doing the work. You get on the right path with the way that nature wants to work, it makes the job much easier. So that's our approach to it, and we call it biological soil management. So we're kind of taking into account the entire biological system for both the plant and its symbiotic microbes underneath the ground. We support the proliferation and consideration of that biology. And we take it in this approach, the EarthWorks mantra that Joel started. Now my boss Joel Simmons started this company in 1988. So coming on 40 years ago. And the idea is that we balance the chemistry. So we use the soil test to kind of peer into what's going on underneath the ground. And consider, we use that soil test to kind of let us know what's happening. So we balance the chemistry on that soil. or understand the chemistry on that soil, know what the limiting factors are, and then we feed the soil. We feed those soil microbes that are doing so much of the work of nutrient uptake and managing the moisture and salinity in that root zone. And we're going to talk, more about this. So it's that systems approach where we consider that chemistry affects physics, affects biology. What that means is that we use the soil test to understand all those chemicals that are reacting in the soil, the ions that are attaching to the soil colloid or are loose in soil solution, and know that those ions affect the structure of the soil, and the structure being the amount of space for gas exchange, oxygen to come in and carbon dioxide to come out. And by the way, that's respiration. That's the way we breathe. That's the way aerobic bacteria, aerobic microbes breathe as well. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. And it's in fact the exact opposite way that plants grow, right? That's photosynthesis, carbon dioxide in and oxygen out. So you see how they work hand in hand. And that's the approach that we're going for. We're understanding the chemistry because the chemistry affects the physical space, and the physical space is that space for oxygen and carbon dioxide to get exchanged, for roots to actually grow and inhabit, microbes to inhabit, and for water to move around. So that physics then affects all that biology, the biology of the plant and the supporting microbes. So here's an example of a soil test, and this is a standard soil test that we look at for knowing that physical space. When it's a clay soil, when it's a thick, heavy clay soil, like Brendan might have at the Duke Golf Course, like George probably has out in Pudding Ridge, I'm sure in that Piedmont off of the Appalachians. You have to look at that a little bit differently than you would on like a sand root zone like you guys might be managing at the athletic fields. But whether we're looking at one or the other, the first thing I'm thinking about is space, is how to create that space. When it's that thick, heavy clay soil, we really focus in hard on the base saturation, the calcium to magnesium ratio. Because that can quickly, either when calcium's deficient, magnesium is in excess, it tightens the soil. But if we can get that balance better, where we have more of a 7-to-1 ratio of calcium to magnesium on the base saturation, it's 68% calcium, 12% magnesium is ideal. But when we get closer to that, those clay colloids that can be very tight and restrictive to each other start to separate, and you get that microporosity. That is the space that I'm talking about to make all these exchanges happen. So whereas on the sand root zone, we build fields out of sand because we want space, right? Because it's guaranteed porosity. That's the only reason we're building fields out of sand, so that when we do have the 12-inch gully washer that's been coming like all summer really, and you can get out on that field the next day and host your game. However, that space can very quickly get clogged up, and especially when sodium's present. Sodium doesn't allow water to move the way it's supposed to. So when sodium's in excess, all that space can get waterlogged and get tied up with water. Also, other things that can inhibit the gas exchange that we're after in sand is bicarbonate crusts. Bicarbonates will precipitate, what they call precipitate out calcium and magnesium when moisture is evaporating out. So as H2O evaporates, in the presence of bicarbonates, the bicarbonate will grab onto that calcium ion, and it'll make a whole chain of that, and it'll do it with magnesium as well, and that will form a crust on top of the soil that doesn't allow for moisture to enter, but very importantly, all this gas exchange that I'm talking about. So these are, again, just ways that I'm kind of talking that we use the soil test to uncover physics, uncover this space conversation. Now, we also use the soil test for other things, for understanding the organic matter, for seeing how much of the thatch are we converting to humus, how much phosphorus is available. Phosphorus is such a key nutrient. It's the energy nutrient. Nothing else really goes into effect for the plant. Nothing, all of its metabolic reactions are ATP dependent, adenotriphosphate. You know, that is the whole magic of turning sunlight energy into glucose. And so phosphorus availability, we can see that on the soil test. So for this example that I wanted to show you, because you're all probably pretty familiar with it, this came from Tembarge out in Kentucky. This was the Aquamax turf type tall fescue. Maybe some of you have spread it. I know I spread it at my house. This is Conley's great tall fescue blend, and it comes up really well. It's got a great dark color, and like 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, it's really excellent. So they were quite surprised when this catch that had a good catch in the fall, winter of last year came out this spring just like really chlorotic. It was like site after site after site. It was dark and going good. So the first thing he did was like, we're going to hit it with that EarthWorks 822 because that compost and the ammonium sulfate, that always gives that really nice dark push. Hit it with that, a nice heavy rate, 10-pound rate, barely got anything out of it. And you can see the picture, very chlorotic, very anemic. It's really peaked looking. So Andy was like, Jack, we got to pull, I'm pulling the soil test, because he called me to say, like, what should I do? They're kind of upset, you know, and I've already pulled a soil test. I was like, well, I guess all we can do is just wait for the soil test, because I don't want to give, I would have said, go with the 822 as well. That's almost, it always works. And it gave some response, but not much. So we looked at the soil test and it jumped out of me right away. You know, first of all, up here, there's less than 3% organic matter. That's low, you know, for a home lawn, for anywhere. I'm on the side, like, you know, more organic matter the better, really, especially when it's like a good humus that manages moisture and does all the work of hosting microbes and everything. However, 3%, very low. The big one, you know, if you were only looking at the base saturation, you're like, you know what, there's really not that much sodium there. The base saturation is pretty damn good. It's got 70% calcium and 13% magnesium. That's really close to the ideal ratios. It's got a 2-to-1 ratio of potassium to sodium, although potassium could be higher, certainly. But the big one is that it only has 32 pounds of P2O5. It is incredibly low in phosphorus. For a soil this size, you know, 8 milliequivalents CEC, I would be wanting to see at least 250 pounds per acre. And so it just jumped out right away that this is, you know, that this is only an eighth of that. So the move is to build that phosphorus. Like I said, phosphorus, and by the way, the saturated paste on the other side here confirms it. Barely detectable any phosphorus in mobility. So that's why we're seeing this chlorotic, anemic, peaked deal. And I'm really just, and so what they're doing now is they're, instead of 822, they're doing repeat applications of 545 through the rest of the year. This was like June, or thereabouts. Yeah, this was June. So about 3 apps through the rest of the year of 545, and we're going to see how that goes, because now we're doing more of a 1-to-1 ratio of N to P, as opposed to the 822. So the soil test uncovers the limiting factors that could be holding back, and it's really site specific. And really, we're using the soil test differently for, like I mentioned, sand, more clay-based soils, Sometimes sometimes we're looking at what limits that physical space. Sometimes we're looking at, what else might be the chain that's holding back good growth. And in this case, it was phosphorus. But this phosphorus conversation kind of leads me into what we're really after is activating soil biology. That's what EarthWorks does all the time. We're trying to affect that soil biology. So in the presence of anaerobic bacteria, when the soil doesn't have that gas exchange, where oxygen's not getting down into the root zone, most of the nitrogen, half the nitrogen at minimum, is being lost. It's bacteria is looking for that oxygen. It scavenges it from nitrate, because nitrate is ultimately what microbes are. The nitrification process is going in, turning all nitrogen into nitrate in the soil. Well, it's an NO3. Well, the anaerobic bacteria use that oxygen in the NO3 as their oxygen source, because there's not enough oxygen coming down into the root zone. So then that nitrogen is lost. So this is why, no matter what, we want to make sure that there's good gas exchange happening in the root zone. It affects soil biology, and of course, we're trying to keep that soil biology active and feeding them with a good available source of energy, good carbon-based fertilizer, because the imbalance of C to N, when it's only nitrogen, builds thatch. And again, not only does this make it very unplayable and not good for athletics or golf, or a home lawn for that matter, but it totally seals off and screws up this whole gas exchange, moisture mobility conversation that we're having. Thatch is kind of the enemy of turf. And thatch is the accumulation of undigested organic matter. And this is where I'm saying if the soil test is showing us good humus, we really want to turn all that thatch into good humus. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is a conversation of nitrification. It takes a certain amount of energy to go through that process. And that energy comes from soil organic matter, or it comes from the organic input, the carbon energy input that you're adding with the nitrogen.
I love listening to Jack do his academy talk, and he brings to the table a youth and an enthusiasm. He has tremendous passion for what it is we're doing. But let me talk about this whole nitrification cycle, because he brought us up to the table here. So I want to talk a little bit about this and bring up what nitrification is really doing and why carbon-based fertility is really important. So think of nitrification as this. Let's use urea as the example. So urea is a synthetic nitrogen. And it is a carbon-based material, but it's not feeding microbes. And we could start with anything. It could be ammonium sulfate, urea. It could be EarthWorks 545. These are all molecules. None of these molecules go into the plant directly. They have to be broken down. So I'm going to start with urea as the example. Urea is going to be broken down in the soil from a urea molecule to an ammonia molecule, NH4. And that molecule is extremely volatile. So you can lose an awful lot of that urea from volatilization, gassing off, or actually from leaching through the soil, depending on what's going on. And this is all dependent on the physical structure of the soil and definitely the biological environment in the soil. It's because it's the microbes that are responsible for breaking down these molecules. Urea molecules is attacked by microbes, and it's broken down first into an ammonia molecule, NH4, and then it's broken down again into an NO3, a nitrite. And then basically that nitrate is very stable. It's not going to volatilize off. And then it goes to a NO2 molecule. I hope I don't have that backwards. I might. It's been a while. But anyway, when you go from a nitrite into a nitrate, what are you doing? You're adding some, you're going from NO3 to NO4. I should check this here before I go on any further. But you're going from a nitrite to a nitrate, and you're adding an oxygen molecule. And all of these things are done by microbiology. So when microbiology breaks these things down into in the soil, they're using energy in that soil. So just like you and I, if we're going to try to run a marathon, we got to have energy in our body to be able to do that. Microbes that are breaking down these molecules that we're putting in the soil need energy. And where that energy is coming from is the available form of carbon in the soil. And this is where you hear things like, oh, there's plenty of carbon in the soil. And there probably is. In many cases, there's plenty of carbon on a soil test. But the question is that good carbon or is it bad carbon? Is it available carbon or is it lignous, long chain, thatchy material that's not going to be readily available to that 20-minute bacteria that we talked about earlier? Think of it this way. It's like trying to chew on a pencil to get energy. This is an analogy I use at the Academy often. And what I'm trying to talk about here is that a pencil is made of carbon. And you and I can chew on that pencil to get some energy that our bodies can work with to do what we need to do, to sit here in front of a camera and talk for 25 or 30 minutes, or to run a marathon, or to do basic functions as a human being. We need energy. We get it in the forms of food. And what microbes get it from is in the forms of humus or available forms of carbon. Now, some of these carbon materials, some of the carbon that we see in our soil is very lignous and not very readily available. So it becomes very difficult for that microbe to really take it. So when we're trying to break down a molecule like a urea molecule into a nitrate form that the plant can take up and then utilize, all of that is being done by the digestion from microbiology, and they need energy. The reason why you're seeing biological soil management come into such strength right now is because even the chemical fertilizer companies realize that adding carbon to their products allow nitrification to work better. The reason why you're seeing so much carbon come in to traditional synthetic fertilizers is because it makes their products work better, because when you put down nitrogen without available foods to keep microbiology going, that nitrification cycle is going to be very sluggish. When you have ample available carbons in the form of composts, like in 545, or in all the goodies that we have in the EarthWorks Foliars Plus line, the sugars and the kelp meal and the fish meal, all of these things provide instant energy, if you will, to microbiology and will allow nitrification to occur more completely. So what we're doing is not only are we getting nitrification to be more complete, we're getting it all the way through the very end, so we can use less in the front because we're much more efficient. In traditional soils where you're literally burning out that soil profile, and that's been a term used in our industry since the mid-60s, soil burnout. That's where carbon is being basically taken out of the situation because we've burned it up. So it's really taken that food source away from the process. So the efficiency of any fertilizer is going to be improved by adding carbon, which is, again, why you're seeing so many companies coming out with a humate or some level of carbon in their products. I don't think there's a liquid manufacturer today that's not putting in some level of carbon. They're probably not putting in enough. They're certainly not putting in what EarthWorks has put in, and they're not getting the quality that they're getting out at the back end, but every little bit helps. And going down this road is definitely the change that we're seeing in the industry. And that change is biological soil management. So it has really worked quite well. Let me go back to Jack. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the biology piece for a couple of minutes here, and then I'll wrap up and get you back to the office. But I think Jack talks nicely about things like mycorrhizae here, and this is the biological piece of it. So we kind of go through a lot of soil testing at the Academy. We go through how to read a soil test at the Academy. We talk about the impact that soil test has on the physical structure. We started and were very fortunate back in the early 2000s to partner with Logan Labs, which is a premier soil testing laboratory. And here at EarthWorks, we run about 15,000 soil tests a year for clients all over the world. So we study soil testing data on a regular basis. All of us, all the agronomists here at EarthWorks talk about these soil tests, and we can quickly and immediately get an idea as to what's going on physically in the soil by looking at this data that we're getting from Logan Labs. And it helps us understand that. Not only are we looking at standard soil tests, which gives us colloidal information, but we also look at foliar information, or I should say, soluble information from a water-soluble paste extract, which gives us some indications as to of what's on the colloid, how much of that material is actually going to mobilize. So it gives us a tool to at least understand how healthy the soil is and if things are mobilizing. But most importantly, those water-soluble paste extracts show us the two limiting factors: bicarbonates and sodium load. And in any turf environment, probably the hardest things to manage and the first limiting factors that any turf manager has is this bicarbonate that will seal the soil surface and keep air and water from penetrating and basically kill off the biology in that area, which leads to localized dry spots. And sodium, which when sodium levels are higher than potassium levels on a soil test, we can identify sodium-induced wilt issues. That's the situation where sodium flushes into the leaf and it starts to dehydrate, and it kind of it starts to wilt. Many superintendents or even assistant superintendents will look at that and think, oh, it's wilting. It must be hot. I must not have had enough water. But oftentimes it's a chemical-induced wilt. Sodium-induced wilt can be quickly identified on a paste extract. But then we come back to this whole concept of soil biology and getting biology back on track. Obviously, sodium is going to knock microbiology back a lot, as are a lot of the things that we do in this industry. But if we constantly are moving forward by getting carbon in there, we're going to overpower some of the things that we do on a negative basis that affect negatively microbiology, or some of the things that Mother Nature does, like sodium buildup. And certainly folks on the coasts where they're high sodic soils, they know these situations. They know what sodium-induced wilt looks like. So it becomes a problem. Let me let you listen to Jack and talk about some more biology and hear what he has to say about this whole thing.
So I talked about mycorrhizae getting this energy that's pumped down through the root system, and it goes to the symbiotic soil biology via plant exudates, via actually pump it. You know, like Will.i.am says, pump it, louder, pump it. The plant is pumping that energy out into the root system, louder. So that's what's happening, and it was recently discovered at Rutgers. This is only a couple years ago. Dr. James White, who's like a microbiologist there, was able to observe under the microscope what he named this rhizophagy cycle. And I remember I was reading one of the turfgrass industry rags one day at work and in the office, when I still went in the office, and drew this this funky diagram, and Joel put it up on the refrigerator in the office as like a reminder that, like, dude, you should be making phone calls. What are you doing? Now, then everyone got hot on it, and like he uses it all the time. And he tried to claim it was his drawing, I think, or something like that. But anyway, that was just one for Joel. So I'm going to go over this diagram because this was my interpretation. In recent time, I've found this other interpretation online. So the rhizophagy cycle is actually the plant eating. That's what it means. Rhizo, root, phagy, eat or engulf, engulfing microbes. And this is the way that there's a lot of nutrient that's actually entering the plant via this engulfing of microbes. Because when those microbes are in there, their little bodies are built up of their metabolic processes bring in nutrient, and they're built up of phosphorus and calcium and magnesium and all the good stuff. And so the plant actually sucks them in and then blasts them apart and takes that nutrient. So it happens in this meristem. You can see in the diagram, it happens where microbes enter the very soft root cells, the new cells at the meristem, and they come in, and the nutrients are extracted via this ROS, reductive oxygen species, where they're actually blasted out. Like ROS is the same sort of oxidation process that we hear about. You take antioxidants to kind of slow down the oxidation process. Well, biological systems use oxidation processes to blow things apart. And that's what it's happening here with the microbes. They're getting blown apart by this oxidation process within the plant. And some of them actually survive this. And when they survive, they exit the plant, and they exit through their exit, they spawn the plant to create new root hairs. So that's what's happening on the left side of the screen. That's new root hairs happening off of the main root, the main meristem at the point. So this is the way that this is the way the plant also grows this three-dimensional root structure under the ground, right? So again, it's working hand in hand. So this is the rhizophagy cycle, root eat.
I do love listening to Jack talk about the Soil Academy and about soil biology. And again, you can see his passion for this. I think everybody here at EarthWorks has taken on a passion for this concept of biological soil management. As I started this conversation, we are very proud of the fact that we stuck through this for all these years and basically, showed and helped golf course superintendents and turf managers of all sizes and shapes across the world discover the importance of soil biology and how to proliferate it. The next steps in the business, I think you will see more biologicals coming out. You're seeing that from some of the big chemical companies. Now that we've kind of proven the concept of biological soil management in our industry, you're starting to see a lot of changes. You're starting to see a lot of companies. Some of the biggest companies in the world, the Syngentas of the world, are coming out with biological pest control products. Again, a great step forward, but without having biological soil management, you're really going to struggle. If you really want to learn more about biological soil management, go find the people that are doing regenerative agriculture. One of the best places to do that is through the magazine called Acres USA. They have some great publications. They put out a lot of great video clips. They have a wonderful trade show every year in December that brings farmers to the table and has farmers talk about how they've been able to build soils. Jerry Brunetti, my founding partner with me, was one of the biggest voices in regenerative agriculture. And he was the one who taught me the concept of biological soil management, which is still active today in regenerative agriculture. In fact, it's one of the fastest growing agronomic concepts in all of agriculture, because it's been proven that we can make significant changes in large scales. And we can certainly bring that to the golf course and to the athletic fields and to the lawn care environments, the home lawns, and make biological soil management really the keynote of all agronomic focuses. So again, I won't say that that what listening to me is necessarily the gospel, but I would say we've got probably 250 people here on the EarthWorks podcast that have lived biological soil management, and every one of their stories is unique to their properties. I would encourage you to listen to any of them. Any turf manager that we've interviewed over the years that has talked about how they've been able to make changes. And I think to a T, the thing that we're proudest of is that all of these conversations have basically said, it's made my life a lot easier. And that is something that does help me sleep at night. So hopefully you've enjoyed me yakking here for a while on biological soil management, which is my passion. And I hope you enjoyed listening to Jack, who is also quite passionate about biological soil management. And please continue to join us. We will have more golf course superintendents and turf managers from all sorts of environments coming and talking about their success stories in biological soil management. And if you haven't become a subscriber of the EarthWorks podcast, please do. We'll let you know what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you again next week.